Om Ganana Ganapategum Havamahe Kavim Kavinamupamashravattamam Jeshtarajam Brahmana Brahmanaspada Shanvanno Devesti Dasadanam Mahaganapataye Namaha. Om.
Good morning. This particular hymn, Om Ganana Tva Ganapati, it's an invocation, or as we call mantra, is from Rig Veda, Book 2, Hymn 23, verse 1. It's approximately, we don't know the exact time, it is approximately 1,500 years before Christ. That's roughly 3,500 years ago. It's addressed to Brihaspati, the Lord of Prayers. And it says, among the Ganas, or group of prayers, to you who are the Ganapati, Lord of Prayers, we offer our oblations. You are the wisdom of the wise and uppermost in glory. You are the foremost king of the prayers, presiding as the Lord of the prayers, Brahmanaspati. Please come to us by listening to our invocation and be present in the seat of the sacred altar to charge our prayers with your power and wisdom.
Well, I am so glad you're here, Srikanth. When I thought about our next iteration of this Interfaith Dialogue series, I said, wow, if we could get in somewhere on Srikanth's calendar, this would be awesome, because I know you're traveling a lot, recently retired, and yet that doesn't always mean a breath of air of new opportunity, but I know that interfaith is very important to you, and so I hope that today our conversation is meaningful to you. I know it'll be meaningful to me and for everyone here today. For those who weren't here for our first iteration, a couple months ago with Brittany Phillips, who is the leader of the pagan community here on the campus, the conversation is meant to bring out opportunities to learn about the religion of the individual, but also about the background of that person, and a little bit about some of their passions and interests that drive them here. And so one of the things that we're starting with is a similar question each time across all of these dialogues, and that is the question of just why dialogue in general? Why is conversation across cultural and religious difference important to the person that we're interviewing or having conversation with today? And so Srikanth, as you think about your life and personal, professional, and religious life, how you have found dialogue as an important part of that expression of who you are.
That's a pretty loaded question to start with. I was hoping he's going to say, what's your name? Why do you say it the way it is?
Yeah. Well, we'll get that. We'll get that in the Q&A section.
The first thing before I get to some of the other bits, I wanted to say the invocation that I presented today, he asked me for an invocation that would be of use. And this was the first one that I remember of at least organized practice of our Hindu faith as I grew up. This was probably in third grade or so. We grew up to a new suburb or a neighborhood in a large city, Chennai, in India. And I don't know what it was, this temple was coming up, and the priest there said, hey, you 5, 6 kids, I want to teach you a hymn so that when the light gets lit, I'd like for the 5 of you to sing. And that is the first one that I learned as a little 8-year-old, and it is still in me. And every time when you go to this temple, that is probably the hymn that the priest will perform to the god Ganesh, as an interlocutor the priest is, to say that please, in this sacred space, please bring the power of your wisdom to us, to all of us. And so it has been just deeply in me. And ever since, I've been this global citizen that has been going around the world, it seems like, where often people just cannot say my name right. People sometimes look at me and say, where do you come from? We lived in Mexico. Until I open my mouth, they think always I am from Mexico. And then when I open my mouth, they say, ooh, Hindu, meaning that I'm from India, right? And and then I've lived in England and here and in Tennessee and in different parts around the world. And every time I go, often it seems like that these dialogues sometimes are very, very on one end of the spectrum. I still remember that I was in Iowa studying, and there was this person from the Christian faith that was coming to proselytize, and they wanted to come and talk with me. And it was very difficult. Who else but Jesus can be that could actually have a cow that eats grass that is green, and then blood is red and gives milk that is white? And I look at him and say, really? That's what you have to say that it is, that the first time that they are talking to me? And then I took that as an opportunity for us to actually have an hour-long chat with that person. And I was hardly 22, 23 at the time. And I don't know why I felt the compelling need that I needed to chat, that just as Jesus is there, just as Buddha was there, just as Krishna was there, these are enlightened souls that came along the way, much like Prophet Muhammad. And they came along to say something that was so dearly needed for that time and that region and the world that they are in. And hence, no matter where you go, which path you take, it ultimately leads to the same path. And that's the conversation that I've been having over and over and over, in some ways animated, in some ways reflective, and in some ways with the people that are really deeply in it, that I learn from them as well, because I don't know enough about the religion of my own religion, let alone others. And partly because most of it is in Sanskrit. This was performed in Sanskrit that I don't understand necessarily. And we know some of Hindi, but at the same time, it's like Latin liturgy that is. And so most of it that I don't understand. So I pick up every time when I talk to even a practicing Hindu, because of the fact that they know more, a little bit more than me.
Yeah, I love to hear that, and especially that story of you growing up and having that such profound early experience of a community that was not just a single conversation, but a group of 5 or 6 young people. So in a way, you were collectively entering into that mantra and offering kind of a song of wisdom, invitation of wisdom, the wisdom to the temple, and how that has shaped then where you've gone. For me, I think dialogue feels like all that I'm invited to do. I've not been called to be the minister to tell people the answers, but to invite questions and shaping of conversation. So even the idea of being a religious leader in a community, dialogue is still my first mode of operation, or at least when I'm at my best, it's my first mode of operation. And then what's great is that kind of like a fractal expanding outwards, we do that at lots of different sections, from the interpersonal or the intrapersonal to the family, to the congregation, and then here on the campus, and all the times we've had opportunities to have conversations over the past 8 years, and all the different combinations and things. And then obviously in our wider society, as we're having some big dialogues at this time around what is the future of this country and this world in regards to differences, in regards to celebrating those, or rejecting those. And so, which is why it's just so important that we have these dialogues. And but how we got here and how we got why we would agree to say yes is typically shaped by all of the experiences we've had before we came to this morning. And so we talked about doing a high five, which is another little segment we did last time, which is sort of just an opportunity to do 5 of something that we each can kind of respond to. And we both kind of resonated with the idea of sharing some formative experiences from our lives that really kind of opened us to the idea of interfaith as an important path. And so we can kind of just switch off, offering short comments about 5 formative experiences that kind of shaped our interest in interfaith work.
Yeah, the first one I remember, at least as I was growing up, was the education. In India, particularly because of the missionaries that were there from mostly Britain, and many of the school systems were actually run by nuns or sisters in terms of different missionaries that were there. And I am the 6th of 7 kids in our family. And so 2 of them actually went to a Christian school. And we never thought of that they are going to a Christian school or a Hindu school. They went to a place of education which was just really, really good. And in fact, my oldest sister, not during high school, but past high school for her undergraduate degree, actually went to a Muslim trust run school, which to this day, all I know is the four-letter acronym of that school. I never realized that it was a Muslim-driven school, if you will. Right? So here you are in a community in India, which is 85% Hindus, about 10% Muslim, and about 3 to 4% Christians. But 3 to 4% of a 1.4 billion people is a lot of Christians, right? And so, and the same thing is with Buddhists and Sikhs and others. And so that is where I sometimes think of that we tend to kind of polarize this conversation as opposed to finding the commonality.
Education, I can jump right into my first one, was really big for me. I went to the largest Catholic university in the United States, DePaul University in Chicago. Not being Catholic, I was raised Unitarian Universalist, but I was very driven by their and inspired by their service learning opportunities. It was a really integrated part. Their marketing team was great. They said, Chicago as an extension of the classroom. It's like, whoa, that sounds great, for me. And I was like really excited about all the learning that could provide. And so going to that Catholic university was really a reshaping of understanding of how to be a citizen of an urban environment, and less about what are the current encyclicals coming out of the Vatican, even though that was a time of great change in the late aughts. But one of the things that was formative while at DePaul was that I was able to go on an interfaith peacemaking trip to Japan. And while in Japan, I was with a priest who was the head of the religious studies department, and a Buddhist professor, religious studies professor, who her study was on atomic bomb discourse and the studies of the religious and ethical implications of atomic weapons and aftermath. So we were meeting with survivors of the atomic bombings. We were meeting with peace activists who were working on truth and reconciliation work. And what was very profound there is that the students that were coming from very different backgrounds and learning about big emotions and big concepts, big historical things, but even things that still face us today. But that to me was an application of interfaith work that really gets out of, again, that polarizing notion of, are you with me, are you against me, the kind of proselytizing dialogue, to something about how are we going to take these values that we have for different reasons and apply them to some common cause, such as nuclear non-proliferation. So very, very formative for me, as you might imagine, at a young age. What about for you?
The second one that I'm thinking of is friends, and particularly in Columbus, Indiana, that I came in early 90s. The first Indian friend, and he's still a friend, they are still a friend of ours, Robert Samuel. And go figure, right? Robert Samuel, he's a Christian, and he's the closest friend that I have. And I never think of it that he's Christian in the first place. Our food habits are different. The churches that he goes to versus what I pray is different. But he and I are good friends because of the fact we share some common things that deeply moves us. And when I was in college, after I finished and before I came to the United States in 1986, there was a time period that I had, and this was a guy that I used to hang out with every day, and he would come over to our house and we would talk, and his name is Shoaib, and he's a Muslim. And only now I really look at it and say, okay, he's Christian, he is Muslim, he is Hindu. You label them as opposed to the fact that they are just good friends, they are just good human beings, and you hang out with them because you share the same values, it feels like it. And regardless of which religion you are in, you share similar values, which is, again, interesting for me at least to reflect back on it.
I think for me, the second one would go while also at college. I learned a lot about what it means to be an interfaith leader, not just being interested in it, but the idea of leadership development. And so I was a fellow with an organization called Interfaith America. It was at the time Interfaith Youth Corps, but it brought 20 students from around the nation together for a year-long fellowship where we would apply our learning on our campuses to build interfaith community on campus. And so at that time, I was running weekly, I think they were weekly interfaith dialogues with the students that would show up to the part of this, one of these open space areas. And but this was a really powerful experience because, kind of like you were saying, like these are all just like really great people who are oriented towards peacemaking, bridge building, love, and got there from different paths. And while there are tremendous differences, there was more that brought us together to do good work on our campuses, especially when young people are in such a formative place around binary thinking, us versus them, religion is good or religion is bad, or a more nuanced understanding of all these pieces. So that was very profound, and some very lasting friendships that I still hold today.
Well, fast forward here in the 90s, mid 90s, we were trying to set up in terms of the Hindu community that was very small, maybe 25 families that were there, and we used to want to meet regularly. And we would meet typically on the full moon day or on a Friday or something like that. And pretty soon we realized we needed a space. And the most welcoming place at that time for us in mid 90s was actually the Unitarian Church that was in downtown. And the cabinet that is somewhere there, the cabinet somewhere it is here, is still the cabinet that was at that time that we had kept our gods and goddesses there. And then eventually that moved in when we came over here in 2002. And that's how the conversation has been for a long period of time with this particular community because of the fact that you've been so welcoming. And that's one thing that you realize, that when you are a minority, you look for those subtle cues that where you know where you're welcome and you know where you're not welcome. And in this community itself, I've felt that in lots of ways.
When I was living in Michigan, what brought me to an example of kind of religious exclusion was there was some, I forget the rhetoric or what was happening at the time, but there was a lot of, maybe there was a mosque being built in Detroit area or something, but a large group of clergy kind of came together to kind of make a stand of solidarity and an expression of welcome while we were in Michigan for a few years. And this was after I graduated with my master's. And I just remember how important it was to do that work. Even though there wasn't these long existing relationships or depth of relationships, there was sort of a responsibility, like a civic duty to bring people together or to draw the circle wider for those who were not yet included. And what that I think really was formative for me was to really know the context of my living, even if we're only in Michigan for a few years, to really understand what is the religious landscape or the interreligious landscape. Because if you don't, then you're working on theory, you're working on textbook academic understandings, as opposed to a very engaged and critical understanding of where you are, when you are, and such like that.
Yeah, and this is one I'm still struggling. I am still learning, and it has been that I've been told, it's been ingrained in my system, just fit in, Srikanth. And as I was walking in today, one of the gentlemen that was sitting there at the back said, "Wow, you got a nice suit." And we rarely see this kind of tailored suit coming in, and someone remarked that maybe it was the Cummins influence. But equally, it is the idea that you need to fit in, or you need to be in the place of worship with respect, or how do people actually dress up? Or this idea of fitting in sometimes means that do not rock the boat, Srikanth, do not say what needs to be said, or do not go and stand in front of City Hall to go and do. And whenever Nic asks me, sometimes I always think about that to say, wow, am I going to be causing more trouble by me standing up there, or is that going to cause me personal harm? And that is difficult. And I still struggle. 25 years ago, if you had asked me about in terms of gay people in general, I would have had difficulty talking about it. 30 years ago, probably at this time, if you had asked me. And it has taken me a while, and I'm slowly getting better at it, but still there are deeply held inhibitions that I have that makes it difficult to stand up, speak up, just like Martin Luther King said, that it is not about those people that don't, in fact, they are on the end. It is the silent middle ground that is actually the problem. And I belong to that silent middle ground in many ways. So this is going to be a lifetime work. And I don't know, I believe in karma. Maybe in the next lifetime when I come back, I might be a little bit better than that than you are, Nic.
Well, you did text me earlier and said, "Is it okay if I don't wear a tie?" And I said, "Good thinking." Yeah. So, it could have been way worse. No, you're doing great. I mean, I think that, again, I like going second, sort of, because then I can just be like, well, this will be good build off. But one of the probably next formative pieces was after I was to be the candidate to be the next minister here, or to come to be determined as the next minister. I read a biography on J.I. Miller, and because I was like, I got to know these people, and not obviously J.I. Miller is not the end all be all, but from biography standpoints, it was one entry point into learning more about this unique town in the middle of southern Indiana. And one of the imageries that I started to really think about was this difference between, sorry to reduce this person, but Henry Ford and the melting pot analogy versus what I feel is a J.I. Miller or some other kinds of philosophies about more of that salad bowl mixing of culture and traditions, as opposed to that melting away of differences. And there was even that image of going through a conveyor belt with all of your traditional garb, and then melting away and coming out as sort of the traditional business person, with the briefcase and the flag. I think there is an image of that from the 1900s. And so it came to me to kind of really understand a part of interfaith work, especially in Columbus, Indiana, which has a huge international population, is this question around, can we invite people to come here on their own terms and stay on their own terms? Immigration policies aside, the notion of, can we have that idea of come here to not fully ever acculturate, or to not see acculturation or becoming the dominant culture as the necessary ideal, but to affirm the unique beauty and celebration of culture in place. So when we have festivals here on the campus, with the food festival, or different events, Dussehra or Diwali or things like that throughout the year, I love going to those, which everyone is welcome and invited to go to those, just to see people celebrating on their own terms, with their own language, with their own colors, with their own smells of food and ritual. And so I think that is still a living challenge. And it's not just the burden on people who are not in the dominant culture, but it's the burden on people who are in the dominant culture, to say, why does this need to be the fitting in kind of norm? Why does this have to be the normal that people aspire to, but to really broaden that to a more pluralistic view of belonging here?
And the last one that I would say is, for me, prayer meditation has been one that has just cut across faiths, I would say. No matter where I go, I meditate almost every day. And much of the influences of meditation either came from Hinduism or Buddhism. And I go on silent retreats, and those silent retreats, whether it's Vipassana meditation in Buddhism, or whether it is in other silent retreats in Hinduism and other ways, and whether you go to a monastery and listen to the Gregorian chants, I just get transported. And it seems like it across all religion, music, meditation, and prayer have formed an important bedrock, in my opinion. And that gets reinforced to me every time, whether I come to this sacred place or I go to a different church or to the Sistine Chapel. Just sitting there and meditating gives me enormous amount of peace. And that seems like is a common thread across faiths.
I was thinking about what my last one would be, but I think the last one would be during my sabbatical a couple of years ago. I spent about 10 days in Transylvania, where it's one of the birthplaces of Unitarianism in the 1560s, and there are still Unitarian churches, a couple hundred in the Transylvania region of what is now Romania, but was for the longest time Hungary. And when I was there, I wasn't doing a lot of interfaith work per se, but I was deepening my connection to the taproot of our history. And the more I connect with the history of Unitarianism, regardless of how culturally different it is today here than it is there, the more I own that identity, as opposed to live in some blurry middle ground as an interfaith person. It's important to know oneself, because the more you can speak from that true and authentic space, the more you can engage authentically. So I think immersion is really critical. Study is really critical. And during that sabbatical, I was able to deepen my knowledge and experience, not just of Unitarian Universalists here in the United States that have shaped, obviously, so much of my worldview, but also folks who are halfway around the world and living out similar values, articulated differently, but nonetheless tethered to who we are today. So that was 5. I think that was. So our second section of our dialogue is really about thinking about the work we're doing here in Columbus, Indiana, and on this interfaith campus, which, if you're less familiar, has 5 different faith communities that have identified and have the majority of their religious life, or their collective religious life, here on the campus. We have the Unitarian Universalist congregation, where we're meeting now, the Hindu community, which serves around 600 families, I think is the estimate these days, of families who practice Hinduism, that are supported by the Sri Ganesh Mandir, or the Ganesh Temple. There's also 3 other congregations: a smaller Jewish congregation, which has been in this using this space for over 50 years. These tapestries are from them. We have had a long partnership with Sharei Shalom. The pagan community, Tree of Knowledge, that was what Brittany and I were speaking about a couple months ago, a pagan community, and also Open Mind Zen Indiana, which utilizes space in the top of the Hindu temple, which has been a great partnership and a great use of that space in the afternoons a couple times a month. So these 5 faith communities can all pretty easily avoid each other, or we can try to find opportunities to encounter each other more, which is where where you move from more of a 1.0 space sharing, cost saving, utilitarian benefit to something that's more 2.0, which is, who are we separate and interdependently? Who are we together, and what impact can we make in each other's development as being good people, and also the impact we make in the wider society. And so about 10 years ago, a little more maybe, much more explicit conversations started to be had around really creating this interfaith campus. When I got here, those conversations were already well along, and a lot of great history has unfolded since. I think my newsletter article, maybe in April, kind of walked some of that history out. But that we won't go through all of that history today, but I'm sure some of it will come up. But Srikanth, in thinking about your time during this past decade, as you've seen what's happened, how would you sort of characterize or summarize where we are today with the Interfaith Campus?
Yeah, and I think you said the third step of this, right, is interdependency comes out of growth from being dependent on another to becoming independent before we can actually talk about this 2.0 of interdependency. And before going to 10 years ago, or even before that, it was largely dependent. We needed something, and it was kind of that we needed space, we needed to come together, or we needed, when we needed to do a cultural event or something, this was a nice space kind of an event, largely one way, I would say. And then I don't know when it was, in 2016 or so, we talked, and it slowly progressed. But the last 3 years, particularly the pandemic, is when we've stood up now as an independent organization where there is actually this temple that is there. We broke ground right before the pandemic, and then we actually built it by 2022. April is when it came together. And then in 2022, August is when we had the inaugural opening of the temple that we did. And it has been now 3 years this August. In fact, we will have at the end of August our annual day. Hopefully that will be the day where there will be a food festival as well on that either Friday or Saturday. I hope you guys will all be able to be there. That's one of the things that we welcome lots of people, it seems like it, for the food that is there. But as I sit there and think about it, I have grand visions, and I don't know whether I'll be able to complete all that grand vision. But at the same time, where it started as a spark has actually grown much beyond than what I actually imagined it to be. In terms of the fact now that there is, you would see, we don't have congregations like this on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We show up at the temple when we have difficulty. We show up at the temple when we have celebration, whether it's your wedding anniversary, whether it's your kid's birthday or something else that is there. And then we show up when there are major festivals, which happens to be every month, it seems like it, that we have one festival or the other because it either follows the solar calendar or the lunar calendar. And you would have typically quite a few festivals that go on every month. And so there are times where we've had over 500 to 800 people, meaning the 600 families, of which 800 people show up on one of these events that we have, whether it's the annual day or Diwali or Dasara and other places, and we end up having trouble of parking and others. And we are still struggling, right? I don't know how many of you know about how the Indian mentality works. If you say 10 o'clock, these people will show up at 10:20 thinking they are early. And then if you're really somebody of influence, you show up at 11 a.m. because you are the man that is, or the woman, typically the man, who is typically the person that is of influence, should not show up very early. Likewise, if you've seen, the reason why we have this caution signal that is out there is because these guys think that they are driving in India. And in India, you honk, not because the other guy is coming in front of you. It is just to tell you that I'm here. And that's why the honking goes on nonstop, because every driver thinks, I want to tell them, the next person, Nick, I'm here. So you take care, not me taking care of you coming in front of me, which means that the zone is supposed to be 5 miles per hour. And these guys are going at 25, feeling like that they have in their BMW that they're going at 50 miles per hour or on the Autobahn or something, right? And they are late. So they are dropping their kids off to the classes on Sunday. And so they are late and they drop, and then they think that it's daycare, and then they leave. And so we have all sorts of problems that we have between our communities still because of how there is a little bit of rigor to the Western way of working, and there is a little bit of too much looseness to the Eastern way of working. Time is just a relative concept. It's okay. It's okay. Everything chalta hai, right? And when you say that, people get upset. So we're still working through that. So
yeah, I mean, I think you bring out a great point, which is like interfaith work can't be separated from culture and intercultural work. Like the amount of times where I've worked with your community or our board of trustees or different community or just trying to explain a topic, it's like, without being an expert in anything really, is just sort of being like, I think probably what's happening here is a missing based on cultural background or how we interpret a term. And it's like, and that's what's beautiful, but also complicated and difficult and frustrating. But the beauty is worth, the juice is worth the squeeze, you know? And is that the phrase? I don't know. Or the lemon is worth the lemonade. But what's beautiful is like when you have these little tension points, when you work through it, when you resolve it, when you release the muscle tightness, then the muscle is stronger and it can be used better. And so I love that. And imagine, if you would, thinking about how much we take for granted for those who were raised in congregational life, Western religious understandings, to like take for granted some of the things he said around kids programming or dropping, you know, like parents' responsibilities or other. I mean, it's just we take, there's so many parts of the iceberg that we take for granted that the HSSI and the temple are starting to have those questions for the first time, doing Eastern religion in the West, and being both a temple and a community center. I mean, it's hard to know what are we doing at times because it's what a temple would be doing versus what we'd be doing because it's a way to keep and cultivate relationship for folks that are living here. This particular thing was given to me by Srikanth at the dedication 3 years ago in August at that at the temple dedication, and it has been such a journey and labor of love for HSSI and for many of our lay leaders who have supported the cause and have also financially supported. Our congregation collectively made a gift, but other people have also individually supported the temple construction and ongoing operating expenses. But that was a very sacred moment to have a temple, to have sort of a field of dreams. It was a field of dreams for a long time that then actually became the temple. But as you mentioned, it's one thing to now separate, to have your independence, which is still in development. And then how do we not forget about each other and return back? The independence, interdependent on each other.
Yeah, and yesterday was a great example. I was there at the temple. There was an event which was, I would say, the equivalent of bar mitzvah, if you will, for what we would call as for a man coming of age, if you will. And that ceremony was there for Prasad, who's the president of the society, and his son. And there is no real place to do this. And so we did it at the temple with the food being served upstairs. And it was kind of, the temple was open for other services as well, where people were coming in that didn't know that there was this function going on. And we were kind of all messed up. But where I was sitting there thinking about it, how wonderful it would be if there was actually an interfaith center that would have been there, and that it was actually available for all of you and all of us together yesterday. It would have been just a beautiful thing. And so one of my dreams has been, in which I've been pushing Nic, and he keeps saying, no, Srikanth, the Jewish congregation is just fine. They feel comfortable with the space. But I actually would want a synagogue here of 1,000 square feet. I would want a Buddhist temple with 1,000 feet or 2,000 square foot in the space, as much as a Hindu temple that is busting at the seams. When I said 8,000 square feet was not enough, these guys said 4,000 is good to start with. I said, well, how about 10,000? And so we came in between to get to 8,000, and now we're running out of space, and we needed to expand, which is what we're in the process of doing. But to me, those 3-4 things, if it came together, the expansion of the Hindu temple to accommodate what we would consider as the main deities. Right now, these are ones that you would typically take around that we have called Utsav Murtis, and we would want the main deities, which in the next 2 years we would do. The 10th anniversary of the Unitarian Congregation, since you came in, is going to happen in 2027. That would be nice. And it is also important for you guys. I think it's the 60th anniversary as well. How nice it would be that if we could actually have an interfaith center by that time. And he goes, Srikanth, that's 2 years away. I said, yes, exactly. When are you going to get started? And we have this dialogue. And then after that, he gives up and lets me off Lay Fernandez. And then I go on to my own thing. So,
oh no, you're stuck. At his retirement, people kept saying, these already retired people, I know you're nervous. What are you going to do? And just follow your passions. And I was just sitting there like, excellent passions. Send him a text. I have something for you to work on for the rest of your life. But the Interfaith Center is this sort of phrase that we've been saying now for a while, but it's not a new phrase. It was on the original master plan 10 years ago when we had our last architect, and there was this series of charrette meetings, which was a new word to me, but that started to shape what might be the things on here. And you named 3 different things. Obviously, the Hindu temple in its independence and in its continued legitimization will want to expand the temple to serve and draw in a wider number of people. And so that's already in the works. And then there's could there be other buildings, multiple buildings that aren't necessarily needing to be the size of either of these 2 buildings, but almost just like a very simple entrance, 1,000 square feet that could have a restroom, maybe a small office, and then a meditation space or a space that's built for that. That could be separate from an interfaith center that's multi-purpose, multimodal, that could have the ability for a large wedding reception, industrial kitchen, things like that, but could also have a meditation room or other things. So those pieces are all sort of at the forefront of our Board of Trustees' minds, of the Hindu Society's board's minds, and to a lesser extent, but not to no extent, the other three partners. And I think the broader concept also could be appealing to the wider community of Columbus, to say we need more spaces that could accommodate larger gatherings, or a small conference that could have different breakout rooms and things like that. So you don't have to rent out downtown or something like that. So there's a lot of juggling pieces. And actually this Thursday, Srikanth and a couple HSSI people, myself and a couple UUCCI people are meeting with an architect to start initial conversations around what a master planning process would entail, to get to a point where a feasibility and architectural kind of process would look.
And this architect happens to be in Nashville, Indiana, Steve Miller, who also built the 2 Buddhist temple in Bloomington. He was also the architect of what we could do at that time. It is not necessarily, it's a, what do you call, it feels like a logistics building there. When you look from the outside, doesn't necessarily feel like a temple, but then he knows how to construct with things with the cost that you have. I wanted to take back away, just like when Nic was telling me, he was twiddling his thumbs thinking, how can I use Srikanth's time? There have been a few other people that seem like that they want to think about this. And one of the guys is Rick Johnson, and Rick Johnson and I have initiated this work. Now it's gaining ground. This notion of J.I. Miller in 1964 said, we don't want to be the cheapest town of our size. We want to be the best community of our size. 60 years have gone by, and we've done reasonably well in a few areas. But if you asked what is the best, and how could we be building America's best community, not of our size, of our community? Just last weekend, or just about Memorial Day, U.S. News and World Report came and put out their top 250 cities in the country. We're number 91. 5 cities in Indiana are there. Number 2 is Carmel. Number 5 is Fishers. Number 50 is, I forget which one. And then 90 is Greenwood, and 91 is Columbus, Indiana. And I'm sitting there thinking, Greenwood is above me? Anyhow, go figure. but then at the core of it is things that we need to be best. It requires educational stuff, requires healthcare, requires affordable housing, requires leisure, culture, and other things that attract people to this community. And my view is that we could be in the top 10 cities because of what we have already, the foundations. And I personally believe that interfaith or multicultural activity or pluralism is an important aspect of this best communities of countries. While there is much rhetoric that is going on around the country right now, people in their hearts know what is right and what is wrong. While they may not be able to express it necessarily saying this is wrong, I don't subscribe to it, but when they see goodness, they appreciate goodness. When they see goodness, they know it. And that's why, for me, this is as much as important pillar. It won't be in the top 5 pillars, but my hope is that this Interfaith Center is one of the best, and that's complementary to why this community is one of the best communities in the United States. And that's where I get excited, Nic, not because you are asking me to.
I thought I had a pull. I thought I had the pull. I thought it inspired you the right way. No, I mean, we have a very similar piece. I'm doing my Doctor of Ministry program right now, pursuing my doctorate that's really focused on the built environment and how do we inspire social change through the built environment of pluralistic spaces. This is a place that is not on the map of a lot of places, the Interfaith Campus. but it will be, and it's not about ego. It's about benefit to others. How many people have come here just coming to the UU community and saying, "I didn't know this existed. Maybe I was a Unitarian my whole life and I just didn't know it." What I translate that to is, as much as that feels nice, is maybe I was a pluralist my whole life and I didn't know it. That there's a certain quality where you are open to this broader understanding of multiculturalism, this broader understanding of democracy, that this congregation perhaps from a mode of functioning embodies, but this campus is very much an expression to the community, a billboard to the community, that our multicultural existence matters, and it's actually a source of our great strength. And so building this interfaith center is going to have tremendous benefit to our own independently functioning organizations and the future of those organizations, but we shouldn't think of it as just, and that's the end of it. It really has this broader societal impact and societal necessity moving forward. So I know that Srikanth and I could talk a long time about this Interfaith Center and Interfaith Campus and all that pieces, but we do want to have a little bit of time for questions or comments that might be on your mind before we end our time today. And this could be about something that was shared earlier about our upbringings, our lives. It could be something about the Interfaith Campus in particular, but I invite you, if you wish, you can raise your hand and do introduce yourself before asking your question, and I will bring you a microphone.
I'm Cynthia Scott, temporarily president of this congregation, all
Make
president.
that sound a little like it was an act. Like
It's our temporary.
that's right.
I'm with you 100%. I'm already thinking up, you mentioned a meeting this week. Yes. My question is, when do we get to the financial details, and when do we encourage people to, for instance, in my case, I would say, start using my IRA, start having amount of IRA distribution going to this multi-campus, whatever we name it, whatever we come up with. How can I support that? Not even just in my lifetime. So we need people to think like that, right? At least partially. So I'm asking if that element of the logistics is being addressed.
Yeah, 6 years ago, I think Dick, Alan, and others, we were talking about this to create a 501c3 organization of the Interfaith Center Community Campus with all 3 C's, if you will. And we haven't yet done that. We should do that relatively quickly as a good starting point. And I think that's a great point. We should do that, which allows people to actually contribute in their ways by which that they feel as to how they could do.
Yes.
I do want to point out there are those of us who are at that age that understand what you're talking about. And there are people here, I'm sure, who have no clue what you're talking about. So you might want to explain further a little bit.
Yes, there will be a lot of communication and orientation around what a capital campaign entails. There are UUA consultants, there's non-UUA consultants who could do really important conversations around feasibility, financial feasibility studies, where there's more one-on-one conversations, group conversations. What does it mean to have a multi-year pledge? What does it mean to set up something that's a draw, different strategies, debt management. Are we trying to go get it all off in 5 years or 30, so there's lots of pieces that will be very well communicated around. And Cynthia, I think the fact that you're thinking about that, hopefully inspiring others, is a sign that 2 years is coming and some good opportunities to start moving now.
I have a question for Srikanth. You grew up in where you were in the dominant culture there, and I know you've traveled a lot, and not sure the order of that, but I just wondered, when you came to the U.S. or other countries that you lived, and you went from the majority to a very fine minority, how was that? What was that like for you, and how did you navigate that?
And It was difficult and it was easy because I could hide behind my minority status and be able to ask questions as though saying, I'm this dumb Indian, I don't know what I'm asking you, just accept me, right? And so it has worked out reasonably well. I actually have been pleasantly surprised. No matter where you go, Sandra, I have found people to be receptive on the main. Now, where I've had difficulty is that I've worked not just in the United States and Mexico and others, I've also worked in a largely, what I would consider for a long while, an hourly population, meaning I worked in the operations where many of these guys look at me and say, who are you? Why are you here? Kind of stuff, right? But then when you get to the core of them, I find conversations are much easier to have. But what has happened to me by practicing religion largely has been at the house. Because in most of these places where you live, a place of worship is not close enough. And if it is not within 15 minutes of where you are, you just don't go. There is one in Indianapolis. There was before that was built. It was in Louisville or in Cincinnati. How can you go? Once every 3 months, you go there on an occasion or something like that. In England, when we were there, it was too far. In Mexico, there was none, which meant our place of worship was our home. And our important days were just within ourselves or the community. And I don't want it to become a ghetto, which is one of the things that happens in many of these places, whether you go to Chicago or to New York City and others, these people congregate towards where they are, or for that matter in England, particularly when it was in Peterborough or in Leeds, Bradford area and all that, whether it's Muslims or Hindus, they just go hang out together in those places and they're not well integrated, if you will. So in large part, we were not integrated into the mainstream. In large part, our food habits were largely Indian, and in large part, where it was work, where it was necessary, the integration happened.
I think we have time for one more. Yes.
Good morning. My name's Missy Dominguez. You said earlier that you don't have like a set Sunday morning service when people come. People come when they need to come. Does that mean that the temple has like open hours where they are encouraged to come at any time? Or how does that work? How do you regulate that and make sure that everything's taken care of and clean and orderly?
Yeah, the temple is open between 9 and 12 in the morning and 5:30 and 8:30. And then during weekends, it's open between 9 and 2 and then 5:30 to 8:30. The priest, however, performs the puja every day when the temple gets open. If you go today at 8 o'clock, when the curtains are put out, the lights and everything is shut. And then in the morning, the idea is that they would come and offer the prayers in morning, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and at night as well before every day. And so the temple is open, the priests are there, and you can go any time that you want to for you to pray there for a few minutes, offer something to the God through the priest, and then you sit there and meditate, if you will, if you wanted to. That's how it is. And so if you went today, right now, there'll be something that'll be going on at this time. And then there are special events where there are actually things that happen. Like today is this evening at 5:30. There are so many gods and goddesses, which is for another time and day. But there is the birthday of one of the god, Muruga. And that is happening today at 5:30. Today happens to be an important, his birth star, if you will, is today in this particular month, which is the second month of the calendar for us, which starts typically in April to May, May to June. And so that's going to be an important event this evening. So there are enough events like that gets posted also on the website.
So let me say one thing about that to wrap us up, because one of the biggest things that I get around interfaith work in general, but around an actual building, is this sense of I'm not sure I have permission to approach in a way. And I don't think no one uses the word approach, but whether that's approaching encounter cross-culturally or approaching other facility, there is this in the West, this deep understanding of capital and property and privacy. And I think a lot of Unitarian Universalists never even walk this friendship bridge over the pathway to go there, when again and again we've said, and the Hindus have said, come by anytime the place is open, you are welcome. I just gave a couple people a tour this week that was open. I said, let's go. We went over, threw the shoes off, went and sat or went and looked around a little bit. And I know that that was a deeply meaningful experience for people who'd never been there. There is food being sold on the weekends, preferably to order ahead, but you can also buy food to support the temple. And I think there's this breakdown around when can I show up, or when am I allowed to show up, or do I need a pass with someone who will take me there, like someone like myself, or a friend who is Hindu. And I think part of this interfaith center work is almost re-engaging an interdependence to say, you're welcome in these spaces, that sometimes we forget because of how we have drawn lines and things like that. And I think the more we can get people into spaces, the more we feel comfortable there. And as long as we maintain that space of respect, I think we start seeing each other as more three-dimensional whole people.
And I could even set up events. My telephone number, I could give it to you all. Anytime you text me, we'll figure out a way to get you in there with the priest being able to perform a puja. That's one. Secondly, if there was the entire congregation wanted to go in groups, we could actually do something there where you would feel meaningful, just like the initial invocation was there. There'd be more of such invocations that would be there, but it would be a moving experience, I would say. So anytime you're welcome, but 9 to 12 to 5 to 8, think of it like that, that you can come anytime. Remove your shoes is one thing that they would ask you, and then dress appropriately to the place.
So I know we could talk a lot longer, but we're just going to take about 30 seconds to gather our thoughts as we have this musical interlude, and then we'll sing our closing hymn today. Thank you, Srikanth.